Great work, Klaus. I know that I can always count on you to send me something that's very lively, very interesting, very energetic, with lots of exploration and lots of contrasts and interesting colors and the winds and so on. So I think that you really outdid yourself here. I think this is the best thing you've ever sent me. And I think that maybe there's a lot about this outlook, this kind of early romantic period outlook that fits you, just, like your particular intentions and like there might have a resonance with some of your interests and some of your voice. It's not to say that I'm saying that you're stuck back in the romantic era, but you may have an affinity for it that's stronger than usual. It's just something I detect here. So I'm going to start this very long evaluation video the same way as I have for the Longa videos and for Gabi's video yesterday. Klaus, I hope you watched that. In fact, I really would like all of my Dotted Longa participants to watch each other's videos and comment on them. And also to let me know that you viewed these evaluation videos, because I put so much work into them. I would hate to think that you hadn't watched it after all that work. And especially after waiting this long for me to get my act together. All right. So, just, a couple of preparatory words here before I jump into the general enhanced evaluation. And that is that it looks as if you have chosen an orchestra that, that's a kind of more of a romantic era orchestra. And you really didn't make any strong efforts here to stick to, to stick to open pitches for your horns. I mean, there's some stopped pitches and some other things, but just judging by some of your harmonic choices, and then you've got pitches that are just not possible on natural trumpet. Natural trumpet, can bend a little, they can bend a pitch here or there, but they don't have the same ability as natural horns to play around with it. So I'm just going to assume that you didn't really play the game, right? Of trying to score natural trumpets and trying to really keep it as a period type thing. So I'm not going to judge you on that or evaluate you on that and the efficacy of that. Okay. One thing that I will mention, let's to just start in on the general enhanced evaluations now. It seems as if you really scored just for a single flute and a single oboe, right? You don't have any markings on them of like, one or two or a due or whatever. You don't have any intervals. It's all a single line all the way through. So, you got to take away the plural, right? All right, so that's got to be flute, right? Oboe, right? And that's perfectly fine. And if like that's all you want is just a single instrument, right? However, that's not to say that you couldn't have like added a second flute and a second oboe, right? Like you could have easily gotten a lot more out of certain harmonies, certain tutis, certain effects, and so on. So, you may have missed an opportunity there. So, let's talk also about the kind of dynamic scope. All right, you are really using powerful dynamics in just in general, right? You have like where Beethoven marks piano dolce, you have mezzo forte, which I'll talk about a little bit more in the next section. You have a forte here where there's where Beethoven has piano crescendo, and you just have very, very very gutsy scoring. So you just have to be careful, I think, about like Beethoven's intentions, right? Because when you change the dynamics, you change the emotional context, right? And you're setting traps for the energy of the players, and you're setting traps for the focus of the audience, right? If just everything is constantly loud, big, smash, just if it's always quite forceful, then you might just tire them out. One of the things that's really great about Beethoven is uh, how little he uses forte, right? He just uses forte in such an impactful way that people have this cliched perception of him as being a tempestuous composer, and all of his music is loud and banging around, right? And that's totally wrong. He's got more restraint in his music than he has force. It's just that you remember the force because he knows when to pull it out, right? So if you changed it to be more typically forceful, right, then you are possibly subverting his intentions, right? So just be really careful, is my warning here. Now, that's not to say that you should throw everything away and start over. In fact, I think that like you've set your scheme, you've worked out everything emotionally to the way that you want it to be. And I'll have a couple comments here and there. So I think you should try to fix up what you've sent me, right? It's not really ready for the stands yet. You've got a bunch of little tweaking and adjusting and editing and everything else to do, right? But it still is a fascinating, like it's the kind of thing where I would just say, really, try to get somebody to play this if you possibly can. Okay, so on with the general remarks. I'm gonna continue to to comment on some certain general things that you need to go through and just edit everything. Okay, the first thing is please. Okay, I've seen this in a few other scores. I don't remember seeing it in one of your scores, Klaus. But please don't use ordinario. Don't use ord to cancel pizzicato. Ord should be used to cancel like string effects, like sul G, right, or sul tasto, or sul ponticello, right, or other kinds of things, col legno, right. The proper cancellation for pizzicato should always be arco, right? Arco, pizzicato, right? Always. So just go through this whole score and just fix all of those. Okay, you need some more proofing on divisi / unison, right? So like I don't know let me check this out. Yeah, so you've got some divisi and some unison scored here, but there's some other spots where, just like you may have not quite. I mean, you did a fairly good job, but but then here we've got this divisi here, and then you don't mark unison there, right? So you really have to go through every single thing and mark divisi and unison. And the thing about it is that, like, in a situation like this, let's say that you had this divisi, and then you had a divisi part right after it, and then you didn't mark unison on this between. In some situations, the player who was playing the top part might just go ahead and continue playing this, and the other guy who's playing like the lower part might just sit out, right? They might think that that is what you intend, all right? Like here's a situation, right? So let's say this is marked divisi and this is marked divisi, and you didn't mark a unison here, right? So the other player, the other, each other player in the desk might just sit out and let right? So you don't want that, right? So always mark unison when you're canceling a divisi, right? There's some situations where, like where if you just really are kind of going back and forth between divisi and unison on like every other beat or every other bar or whatever, like maybe mark it with, mark it as like separate voices, or you can say simile, right? That's a quick fix. Yeah, but other than that, you need more proofing on like wind player number 1, wind player number 2, odd duet, right? So this is obviously intended to be both bassoons, right? Because it's an interval. So is this supposed to be first or second bassoon or both, right? We don't know. I don't know. When you get to this delicate stuff in here, is this supposed to be first bassoon or second bassoon? I'm assuming just a single bassoon, right? That would probably be the most opportune. Okay, your tenor trombone part should, here you have A trombone, here you have B trombone, all right? This has to be T trombone, all right? Oops, capitalize that T, right? ATB. Just think if you had a soprano trombone, you could have SATB, soprano trombone. I've seen a couple of those on YouTube. So, so it's just some more general stuff. I think your slurs need a little bit of work. All right, you have a lot of forceful scoring, and I think that like you may be thinking, oh, it just really fits in here that like I'm just really, putting the pedal to the metal here. I'm really just being emphatic. So I don't need any slurs, but even in very emphatic scoring, slurs can help a lot, right? The problem is that without it, especially in string playing, you can end up sounding very choppy, right? Ta 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 ta, right? But what if it were up down up down up down up down? Right? No crescendo in here, right? What happened to the crescendo and the diminuendo? So that's something that, like the crescendo and the diminuendo, actually the slurring can actually help that become like smoother and more convincing. Right? So you might want to rethink some things, especially like making thematic statements like this, like where you just really want to fix something in the listener's mind, right? So those are, just a few general comments, right? So now let's do some more enhanced evaluation bar by bar. So, these are things, once again, just to try to help you get your score ready to be rehearsed, to be performed, to be made more of a permanent, like a permanent score, right? Something that you would want to get published or, have it sent to the stands, right? That kind of thing. Okay, so, a few little things like, for instance, this should be a written E, right? Sounding D, not a D sounding C. I took the liberty of transposing your score, and I also got rid of the piano. You had the piano staves in it still. So just like I say in my guidelines, just get rid of the piano staves. Don't need them. We all of us by now have most of, or I would say I've got about 300 or 400 like regular viewers of these evaluations, and they have watched evaluation after evaluation. They must have the piano score memorized or partially memorized by now, so we don't need it below, right? And I prefer to have things transposed, and I think I forgot to transpose things, or it's either you sent it to me untransposed, or I forgot to switch it back or something like that. So I had to do it twice. But anyways, okay. Now here I'm noticing that you're using a lot of like the primo secondo kind of thing, the 1-0 2-0. It's probably just easier, just to write one period. Do you know what I mean? That's right. I mean, you might think, oh, stylistically, I like the look of this better than I like one period, right? But after a while, things can get a little confusing. The little circle can be confused for a harmonic sometimes if everything is jumbled together, and it's just a kind of a cleaner look, I think. Just the two period kind of thing, rather than the primo secondo thing. All right. You should proof this section for fermatas. Right? You obviously intended to put fermatas on these notes here, and probably on this and so on. There's really no need for you to put fermatas on the eighth notes. You could just have quarter rests with fermatas on them, right? Now let me open up my keypad here. Why does it jump over there? That's weird. So, it should just be quarter rests with fermata signs, right? That's what you want there. And then, of course, all this should be fermata, and this should be fermata, and so on, right? Because, the players are not going to be, especially these players right in here, they're not counting to start on a note here, right? The only people who really need that are these guys down here, and here you left them with a bar rest. This is the most dangerous thing of all. When you have an incomplete bar and Sibelius chooses to mark it as a bar rest, right? Think of these players sitting here counting to 2 and then getting ready for this pickup, right? That would be a disaster. So it's better to just really, really make sure that you have the correct, that just always proof for that, okay? Here's, that could be erased. Right, that's another little thing. So yeah, so really watch out for that stuff. And then, of course, this is also, should be fermatas. All right, so that's how things should look there. All right. So you should also consider adding ritardando or rallentando here. Da 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 da. Just think of how did Spencer Myer interpret this, right? Just like if there are ways of following the interpretations of great pianists, right? That's really what you want to do. Okay, so now you start off on a mezzo forte, right? So I don't mind mezzo dynamics, but I really am concerned about them being prevalent all the time, just really, being the default, right? And you, Klaus, at the stage of development you are, as a composer, as an orchestrator, and so on, you should be trying to find ways where you don't have to use mezzo so much. It's like a security blanket, right? It's like, oh well, I'm not too loud, so I'm safe here, and this is like the place where everything is just kind of generally can start, and and this can be the place that's very safe, and it's my that's nice, the median place. I want you to just completely rip up that idea, throw it in the trash can, okay, throw it in the rubbish bin. You should think in terms of restraint and force, right? Force and restraint. So think of how Beethoven manages his dynamics here. It's like all piano dolce. So it starts off piano, then it's piano dolce, and then he just writes leggermente here, right? And then piano crescendo, right? And then he pulls back to so he makes these beautiful statements, and it's really lively, energetic, and powerful music, and he like never gets really all that strong, right? So you don't have to be in the mezzo zone, right? It's like a gray area. It's like limbo, right? It's where souls go that that weren't good enough to pass on in the afterlife, or not bad enough to be punished, right? So they're just floating around, It's just kind of gray area. Now that said, like mezzo dynamics are used a lot to sort of back off musicians when they're accompanying dialogue and so on, or sound effects in a film. But that's a kind of a form of accompaniment, right? It's like having a soloist who's singing loudly, and then everybody else is mezzo forte under them, right? So so just be careful about the whole mezzo thing, okay? I'm not saying that this is wrong. I'm just saying be careful. It's like when the first thing that I see after the introductory theme is a mezzo forte, I just immediately my hackles go up. Okay. So and here I mentioned this before, about possible choppiness. And this could also be slurred, like you have this slurred and you don't have that slurred. I actually prefer I would almost prefer that you had nice long slurs on this, and then right here, ta ta ta. I just really love that motion, right? But then it's kind of cool the way that you vary the phrasing. I'm not saying anything is right or wrong about the approaches that I'm suggesting, but that you just watch out for choppiness where you could get smoothness. Now here you have this beautiful harmony here, and here you have a single line. So you are playing with the minds and the ears of your listeners. They're going to be expecting an answer in thirds, and you're not giving it to them. So it's distracting, right? So you're distracting the audience. You're saying, "Oh, well, I'm not going to do it." Ha ha. Right? That's very rarely would Beethoven do that, right? This could be all done in thirds, except for ending with a perfect fourth at the end, right? So thirds below, right? And then ending with a C and an F at the end. So so just watch out for that. And you probably don't need mezzo forte in your answering motifs. Now let's talk about ta 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 ta. So this is going to have a limping kind of an effect. So you can hear it in the mock-up. The mock-up is not lying to you. It's sort of almost has this kind of a skipping or limping kind of a sound. Now if that's what you want there, that's fine. It's like if you love it, then great, right? That is your thing. That's fine, right? Just the only question that I've got, that if this is the way you want to do it, then what's going on at bar 65, right? You're not going to do the same thing here, right? Shouldn't we have some uniformity there so that we bring the audience back to the idea of the slurring as before? Or do you want to rethink this? And just go up, down, ta 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 ta. Do you know what I mean? Rather than ta 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 ta. So just watch out. Watch out for that. So let's jump ahead a little. So I noticed that you are sort of using like you cut out some of the rhythmic accompaniment here under these patterns as a kind of as a kind of like you're sort of insinuating a kind of like management of the energy here, like kind of almost like in a new way of rhythmic phrasing. Okay, I understand what you are trying to do, but I still feel the emptiness, and I feel that some of that springs from the fact that there isn't enough. There just isn't enough direct energy happening in your your thematic or your patterned elements here. Do you know what I mean? It's just sort of like suddenly you pull the rug out from under the listener rather than guiding them into the gap and then pulling them out of it. Do you see what I'm saying? So I think that just needs to be much more deliberate right in here. And I would say, same thing at 83 and 84. Is it? Hang on. Yeah, so yeah, right in here. And like I can see, like you can see right in here, this sort of like this works really great because it's just one little gap, right? And then here, like the gap gets bigger. So I just feel that this needs to be way more deliberate, right? These elements, right? You drop them down to mezzo forte. Maybe they need to stay at forte. Maybe they need a little bit more help. Maybe here's where that second flute or second oboe could be very helpful, right? Okay. All right. So you've got these. You've got this thing here. Da da dun. Right. Ba da dun. What does Beethoven do? Da 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 da. He makes it a nice big half note. Now, if you're worried about like you want to leave a slight gap, I would say score a half note and then put a pausa after it, right? Just like a little lift. Da 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 da. And then like the place to put that would be before like after, put it after the half notes in the parts that are holding, and then before the anything that is following, right? So that the conductor just really knows. I just really want to, I want there just to be a slight gap in order to place the next thing, the next note, and also to just like allow a tiny bit of time for the reverb and the hull to relax, right? That's a lot of what pausa does. So yeah, so I just feel that this is, you're changing the emotional context of Beethoven too much here by just, by having this be a quarter note rather than a half note. And I guess that would go the same for like the recap, right? Like here, like where you've got these, the da da da, right? Rather than da da da. Yeah, Beethoven's planning is very deliberate. You just really be careful when you change it around. Okay, now let's jump back to bar before D. Okay, so you've got this. We'll talk about this when we get to this section. But you've got your little patterns in here, first trading off to second and so on and so forth. You're not going to do that here on the second ending? I think you just forgot to do it, right? So like I wouldn't, like here you're, like the way that you have got it scored, the first is just going to continue to play for, a bar and a half. And I mean, it's certainly possible. But I would definitely want it marked in the score, right? So if I were the conductor, so I would know who got what part in the instrument parts, right? So I would know what to say, like, hey, is that second or first there? That's the most embarrassing thing to say, right? Both for the conductor and for the orchestrator. It just means that you weren't clear enough in the part. And it could be that the player doesn't even know, right? Because maybe the parts just, the copyist didn't even know what they were doing, right? That has happened to me before. Especially people thinking that the parts could be automatic if they were, extracted from Sibelius. Okay. Yeah, so we've got a little problem here. This you have a really, we'll talk about this when we get to the section, but this is really nice and deliberate and it's beautifully scored. And I get the whole idea of like, like you're teaming up the bassoon with your your trombones and horns and so on. So you kind of want it to be a little louder. But the problem here is you're getting higher and louder and more emphatic, and your strings are still mezzo forte. And so it's like, da da da. You see what I'm saying? You're just it's leading nowhere, right? And it's I feel it sort of leaves the energy hanging here, right? I mean, can't everything be the same dynamic, right? Why do the strings need to be so quiet and all this ba da do boo da do ba da 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 da? Meanwhile, the strings are going. Do you know what I mean? I just feel you've got a big imbalance here. I think if everybody were playing the same dynamic, it would just fix itself, and then everything would work fine, right? So if you love your mezzo fortes, then make everything mezzo forte, right? Maybe you could just be soft for a while instead of so loud all the time, right? And then build slowly an energy from here. Okay, and then here at bar 55, before you had flute come in, right? And then as things are descending, you have your oboe hook back up, and then the clarinet doesn't come in till like the very end, right? Couldn't like the oboe continue to descend down? I mean, what does the flute need extra energy up here for? Couldn't the oboe continue down? Couldn't the clarinet start a little earlier? Couldn't there be more voices here? Couldn't one of your cellos, or excuse me, one of your bassoons be doubling the cellos? It's just it really feels underpowered in the middle here in your strings. I just feel like there's all this weight on top and this, and there aren't even any strings playing up here, right? It's just these screaming winds on top, and they're rushing down here to a fortissimo. They're going to be way louder than the strings underneath them. So like the strings just feel weak, right? I feel like they need a lot more help right in here. Okay. All right. So and then beat before E. So this is something in Sibelius. Like you probably noticed in your mock-up that right in here you couldn't really hear the melody in the upper divisi first violins, and this is why. Is because you left this mezzo forte as a in second voice, right? So all you have to do is put your thumb on the option key, right? Option or alt key if you're on PC, and then tap the number 5, and then it goes to this light blue scale. That means all voices, and from here, the mezzo forte will apply to both voices in the staff. Okay. Then just a couple of things before we're about to go into the section by section analysis. Don't worry, Klaus. Okay, but just a couple more things here. Let's jump ahead here to this screen. Right in here, these are E flats, right? Not E naturals. This da 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 da. It's always a half step, right? Da 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 not da 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 da. No, that's not right, right? Okay. And then we jump ahead to the very last screen here. Okay, so all right, so this right in here, you've got some problems here in terms of balance. What is the most important thing that's going on in here? I can't hear this. Why? Because everybody's going dun 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 dun. Even when we get to here, I still can't hear it. It's not prominent enough. Right? What does Beethoven want the audience's attention focused on? Always ask yourself that in the original score. What's the important thing there? Right? He's got these little, in the piano score he's going and then in the right hand he's going dunt, 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 and then gradually toward the end it goes bump, 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 right? Which here is just strings, right? You're not going to use, like here you give me a tutti chord at the end on the second ending and a bit of it here in the first ending, but no, no brass. What happened to the rest of this in the brass and possibly in the timpani, right? There's no timpani at the end, right? Maybe you don't need to go ba da 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 da. Maybe you could just be going dun 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 dun. You know what I mean? So yeah, so just maybe rethink this ending. All right. So those are my enhanced evaluation notes for this. And, of course, I'm just sitting here picking it apart, Klaus, and I hope you are not taking it the wrong way, because I think that you did a great, great job on this. It doesn't change at all how I feel about it, except the fact is that, the better the work that you do, the more I'm going to feel an urge to help you improve it, right? I'm just really going to try to get you, up to the professional level as much as I possibly can. Okay, so now let's talk about section A. So our big concern here is, does the intro set the mood effectively? And I think that it does. I mean, like you do this little harmony thing in here, and right here you return to it, right? You have a little harmony happening in piccolo and flute and so on. I mean, it's a lovely idea, which I as I mentioned before, should be reiterated here. Now, I think that you probably don't need this. You probably don't need this. This little slurred staccato. Did you notice how weird, how like almost affected it was in the in the mock-up, right? Ta ta ta. It's almost like it's just a bit. Twee is how some people would put it here in New Zealand, right? So I don't think you need it. I think all you need is just a slur to this, right? Ta ta ta. Because that's what you really want, anyways, right? You're gonna get a release. Once again, like you could use a pausa after it, right? And you kind of get the same kind of feeling of lift. What you want here is a lift, right? So, I mean, yeah, slur to a staccato, but you just have to make sure that your players don't overdo it, right? Could you possibly slur here? Ta 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 ta, rather than ta 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 ta. All right, maybe I think you need longer slurs on things. And you can be you use mezzo staccato in places. You could be using portato in places, right? You could be marking this with tenuto marks and putting a slur over it, and just getting this nice, beautiful throbbing sound, right? All right. So, but does it set the mood effectively? I like the pizzicato. I like the little ending on arco. I like the little wind chorale up here, except for this wrong note. So yeah, so it's just really, I feel it's a lovely start, and has a wonderful character. But I will say I don't feel it is that Beethoven-like, right? It feels more early Romantic period, right? Like maybe like Mendelssohn, right? It feels like about 15 to 20 years forwards from Beethoven. So so the short answer is yes. I think you set the mood effectively here. All right. So does the music start, or does the melody start with elegance, the main theme? And I mentioned before about how it would be possible to slur this and make it sound more soaring, more intense, more and put the hairpins back in here, right? I mean, they're there for a reason. Da 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 da. Beethoven wants you to open it up and then close it back again, right? It's something is emerging. What's emerging here? What's emerging is his joy, right? He's like he composed himself, right? He's a composer. He composed himself before walking out into the countryside, right? And he's just like, I am going to have a great day today. And he steps out the door, he turns the corner, he gets out of stinky Vienna, and he's walking in the countryside, and he just feels this enormous feeling of joy happening. And then he gets a little laugh from something, right? They're like, it's easy to add programmatic elements to this. But Beethoven studied, he studied pictorialism, right? The idea that music could express a certain feelings, certain actions, and so on, right? That was an actual thing that was a category that people studied, and yeah. I think that if you're going to have your horns last for the duration of a dotted half note, the same thing could happen with your winds, right? I think this just feels uneven the way that it just lets go beat early. So yeah, and this could also be slurred, right? This beautiful little clarinet line in here. Is there a natural flow to the accompaniment? I like the whole idea of the ta-ta-ta-ta-ta. And this could also be mezzo staccato. Ta-da-da-da-da. And I love this answering, after this, note against note, right? Or note, the little syncopation in here. Then you go to these little diving intervals. Da, 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 da. And then, back to dun, 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 dun. Yeah. Definitely, if you're going to go mezzo staccato here, you should go mezzo staccato in your, in these little answering things. And if and for that matter, yeah, you could. I don't know. I guess you don't have to put another F here. I guess it's fine the way that it is. So yeah, I would just say, so maybe adding some of those things, thinking about it, is there a natural transition to octaves? I feel that's all very, very nicely done. Do you expand without clogging up? Sure. So I would say yes. You did a great job on this exposition, right, of the melody. And then, what's wrong with the word leggermente? Why does everybody keep leaving it out? Right? Is this not leggermente? Is that something we want to keep from the players? Right? Why is that information that they don't need to know? Right? Beethoven is telling his pianist, I want you to play this deftly. Right? I want you to play this play it very adeptly, right? Or like very agile, right? And I want your fingers to just flow over the keys, almost like they were tickling them or something, or just, I just want it to be very light and just rippling, just almost, just very virtuosic but casual, right? So, what's the word for that? Leggermente. Right? So just put it, everybody in this section who has 16th notes gets a leggermente. Now I've commented before about how this doesn't need to be mezzo forte, right? Because what have you got? Now if you want that contrast, that's fine. That's, I would move this forte back to here, right? So everybody starts with the forte, right? So is where we would want this to match up, right? All right. So just those are my thoughts on that. I feel that you contrast with the theme. That's beautiful. You contrast between the lines, right? The flute family is answered by the oboe. If you take my advice, it'll be oboes, right? And then you contrast, between clarinet answering and bassoon answering. And I feel it's just really a lovely idea. Goes quite high there, but a decent first bassoonist will make mincemeat of that. It'll be totally fine. So you didn't need any harmonic support. Checked all the boxes. So now we're going into emphatic color of line. Right? is my first thought there. Da 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 da. And this is so cool, the way that you go into harmony here with flute and oboe. Could you give any love to some of that in here? Is there any way? I mean, yeah, you do. You harmonize here. Yeah. Da 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 bum bum bum. But you don't harmonize in the same way, right? You don't. Yeah. Right. So this little F thing happening here. But it's still beautiful the way that you managed it. You probably don't need to make any changes or anything. I think it's lovely. And I like the use of the bassoons and horns here. See, like this is answering my next question, right? And that is, is the does the harmonic density set up what follows? And it does. And I really love like the da 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 da. Just really lovely. Just the management of the dynamics in here. I think that's really really nice. And then here, this is kind of like a semi portato. I think you could, maybe it would be better for this to be like mezzo staccato or portato, right? Rather than just put a slur over repeated notes. Okay, so slurring over repeated notes, I worry about it. I worry about it because it can be intentional or it can be just an idea of very sloppy scoring where the if the orchestrator or composer really thought about it, then what they might want to do is just have this be one long note, right? And everything flow around it. Or they might want it to be portato or mezzo staccato. Or they might want it to be that sort of semi-portato kind of a thing. So if that is intentional, then great. And if it's not, please think about the results. Okay? All right. Yeah, so this takes us to the next thing. Do you maintain strength? Do you have the same texture? Do you contrast? And so on and so forth. And you've chosen to, to start with this, beautiful kind of small tutti, I would say. And then you're just answering it with a little wind chorale. And then nice, digging in here with the strings again and releasing. Yeah, once again, question, are these both intended to be slurred, right? Because you do it this way, maybe not this way, and so on. And just like, that might actually that's one thing where people might raise their hands at a rehearsal, right? Just like, are we missing a slur at, bar whatever? Okay. And this is lovely. Bum, bum. And then, yeah, just adding a little bit of strings there. Boom, and timpani. Bum. Yeah, so it's pretty emphatic. Like you are not pulling any punches at all, Klaus. So like just like if that's what you want here, yeah, that's what you are doing. That's what you're getting. Okay. So other than that, I don't have any problems with that. So let's move on to B. Da 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 da. Yeah. Okay. So, all right. So look, nobody can hear this. The oboist is having so much fun here. Can't the bassoonist play mezzo forte at least, or maybe even mezzo forte crescendo, and then drop down to, maybe just diminuendo back down to piano, because this is not enough. Like the balance here is way off, right? Because the oboist is in their sweet spot. And the bassoonist is, kind of in the lower tenor register. I mean, it's still a fine place, but it's not doesn't have the same projection, right? The oboist is like 3 times louder, right? In terms of like just the balance. I had a comment. I'll just share this with you really quickly. This one tired oboist, obviously, commented on my Tchaikovsky video about his the oboe solo in the 4th symphony, and he said there is no sweet spot for the oboe. Okay, that person has played too many disappointing parts. Okay, All right, so here we get into our. Okay, so Klaus, you may or may not have read my pitfalls video, right? And I have counseled a lot of people to not do what you're doing here, and that is to just go restita, 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 restita. Okay, fortunately for you though, you only do it for 7 beats in a row. So I would say because it is so brief, I will give you a pass on this, right? I almost feel though like if just like the downbeat of the first bar, if it actually started on C sharp, right? If these players, went C sharp da 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 da, like I think that it would things would just be a slightly more even, right? That just more of a fighting chance. Okay. All right, so like just really watch out for the dynamic imbalances. You have a lot of parts where the somebody's piano, the other guy's mezzo forte, and so on. Right, so here, like you're coming in very, very emphatically with your violas, right, and pushing here to a forte, while your winds are just still kind of tootling along at piano, right? So I mean, you can see like that just really makes this stand out, very, very, very loud. And then here you're going da 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 da, and then suddenly you're going da 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 da. Now, why don't we have a D here? Like, is there these bars are identical? Why no D here? Maybe you just forgot to put it in. Maybe it was a copy paste error. But like, you do need it. You just suddenly dropping it out. You lose the strength, right? You've got all this stuff going on down here. This da 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 da. Right. Right. Okay. So the only thing that I would say here that is I mean, besides from the dynamic imbalances, like you have parts that are like mezzo forte and forte and so on. They're really shouting over like a lot of the like this piano to forte crescendo and so on. Just feel like you need to normalize some of the dynamics here. The thing that worries me the most is just that this da 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 is not very strong, and it's the whole point of this section, right? These 4 bars, right? I've already talked about this. I'll mention it one more time, and probably just not. I will stop harping on it so much. But the way that the chord is constructed for the left hand, it means that the outside fingers are going to be on black keys, and the middle finger, the strongest finger, is going to be dipping down into that kind of cavern and like hitting that white key really hard, right? And then the next note goes to a black key, right, in the middle of the chord. So this is absolutely like the if there was a note in anywhere in this passage that needed to be accented, it really is the da 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 da. And I'm not so sure that 1 or 2 bassoon players plus viola and then cello are enough, right? You got all these brass players sitting around checking their Facebook on their cell phones. Like, could they do anything possibly? Or cell phones? Shows how old I am. On their smartphones, right? Could maybe like your alto trombone player. That'd be a great note for an alto trombone player to just fatten alongside the bassoon player, right? Or maybe just a standard tenor trombone. Or stop note, open note on horn, which I've mentioned in other places. Okay, so was there a complementary timbre before leading into this? Yeah, do you think ahead to widening the gap? Beautifully, right? If the balance were good, right? And then emphasis on alternating middle note. That's what I just talked about, right? And you worked out your own like the dot. You've used the dotted rhythm. Yeah, ta 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 ta. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, and then then we talked about leaving this gap in here, right? And just this needs to be more emphatic. Da 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 da. Like maybe if you were to punch on these, like maybe like one of your trumpet player or something could go, pum pum pum. Do you know what I'm saying? And then down here like this, this whole thing could you've got the doubling here with the viola. Maybe you could finish with the viola like hitting this B before it goes to these thirds, right? Yeah, but you just need more emphasis here if you're going to leave this gap. Your patterns need to do more work, right? Okay, now gap widening further. Yeah, just right. You know, if these guys are going to come in here, maybe the brass could like start to slide in a little earlier, right? And the slightly expanded sound picture, right? And then really spreading the harmony out here. I think you did a good job with that. Yeah, and then this dun da da dun da da dun da da dun da da, nice little galloping idea here, and then these trills with the second oboe, like yeah, I almost feel like like your second violins are really not doing anything all that important here that couldn't be played by other instruments. Especially like trumpet. Like your trumpet is playing this low B. I mean, what do they need to be down there for? Right? They could be supporting the strings and doing more of a widespread job there. I mean, it's basically just doubling what the horns are doing, right? You bring your trumpet in here, support some of this, and then you would have your second violins trilling and supporting the oboe, right? So, just an idea. Anyways, but with all that said, I think that this B section is really really fun. It just you need to work a bit more on the balance and the color and so on. But I think you know what to do. Pretty sure. Now let's look at section C. All right. So now, does this represent a new quality of tone compared to what you did before? Well, it kind of doesn't, because you made the new statement of B oboe, right? So now, it's like here we are at C, and like it's oboe playing the melody again. But I mean that's neither right nor wrong. Right? It's just an aesthetic choice. And I like the way that you sort of fold into the flute here. Probably the best place to dovetail to the flute would be right here on this E. You don't need to really have the flute start in early. But I can see the motive here. I mean, you could also like fade in and fade out. You could go hairpin diminuendo here, and then start from piano and hairpin diminuendo, hairpin crescendo into mezzo forte by this, right? If you wanted to sort of have that semi-seamless kind of overlapping. But I'll tell you something, what would Stravinsky do? He would just cut this, and then he would just have the flute start right here on this E. Right? But yeah, bassoon supporting oboe, and then flute being supported by first and second clarinet, and a little bum, little 5-1 here in the the new 5-1 here at the end of this phrase, right? And then here you answer it. Did you notice how underpowered this sounds in your mock-up? Just like, what's going on here? Maybe piano is too soft. Or maybe if this were just piano dolce, then this wouldn't feel so empty, right? It just feels so So this is an example here of how when you change the dynamics, you change the emotional context, right? Because Beethoven has taken everything to this big climax here. Da 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 da. And then what is his dynamic here? Piano dolce. Answered, piano dolce. Now he's strong again. Right, but when you make this mezzo forte, then suddenly this just becomes a pale ghost, right? And it doesn't really contribute to the anxiety that leads forwards to this flash of temper, right? Right? So that's why you need to have real caution when you change around Beethoven's dynamics, right? Anyway, So about the only comment like going forwards here is that you really have a big expanded chord here. You probably don't need I do A here on this, you know, on this horn. I'd rather see expanded harmony here than so many single pitches, right? You got two horns, you got two trumpets. You almost never use, you're barely using both at the same time so far, right? Just, like there are a couple of intervals in your horns, right? But mostly I do A or single notes. So bum bum bum, right? So when you think about it, like the thing about the problem that you're looking at here is okay. It's actually two problems. Okay, so the first one is that you got nowhere to expand to because you are already inhabiting the full sound picture from the beginning, right? So that is, you got this C sharp dun dun kind of thing happening, right? Just way way up high. Okay, and then when we go to the next iteration of it, the only expansion that you really have is like you got more brass here, and you've got like a high piccolo. All right, okay, all right, and there's some repositioning here of your strings. Okay, but the problem is that like if you put that overhead from the very beginning into this chord, then you aren't growing emotionally the way that Beethoven does, right? He goes da 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 da. Do you know what I mean? It's like he goes upwards, and then he floats downwards from there, right? But the problem is you're giving us the high notes first, right? We don't need to go so high, right? And also just like the strings are just really not contributing. They're contributing hardly anything here, right? I think you could have a much more beautiful mixed color right in here. Okay, just like some of your other really great tutti scoring that I see. Right. Okay, and then like if you end like here's the other problem is that these notes from here, da dum, nothing. What happened? You're not going to let the players finish? Okay, this is probably just an error of turning the screen, turning to the next screen and forgetting to put them in. All right, it's all fine. But ba da 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 da, and then here da da da. Flute's probably completely unnecessary here. It maybe just dovetail right here on this pitch right here. I mean, yeah, you could have the two of them together. They're not really all that accompanied and so on. But the oboe is right in its sweet spot. Speaking of sweet spots for oboes, and the flute is, I mean, that could be a juicy register if nobody else if there's no competition. But it just sort of sounds a little. There's a slight goofy sound I feel when oboe and flute are when we have low flute and oboe in its kind of low middle register and so on. It's just it's not the greatest sound. It's like the mock-up is not really telling you the truth here. I feel it'd just be better just to have oboe dovetailing to flute here. But like, there's nothing wrong with this here. It's just yeah. But like, just the biggest problem here is that the chords, like the contrast that you've got, is just like some slight repositioning of the strings and adding brass. But like the there isn't any jumping upwards, right? It's because you're already as high as you're going to get, except for the piccolo A's, right? So think about that. Think about possibly just rescoring the previous chord lower, bringing in the strings a little bit more in a fuller place, and then here, why can't the first violin be playing octaves here and hitting that top C sharp along with the flute? Yeah, I think this could be a lot fuller, and you could be using more pitches in your horns and trumpets. Okay. But I mean, still, it's like you have some great ideas. And I really love the, this is a little fussy here, this, tie, tie, ta, ta, tie, 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 ta, 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 tie, 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 tie. Just maybe try to have nice, long, fuller bow strokes. Ta, 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 right? That's so much easier to bow. You know, I mean, if it's going to be so kind of mincing around or fussy, maybe just better to have staccato, or just détaché, you know, da 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 da, or just slur everything, right? I mean, it's perfectly fine to go slur, slur, staccato, slur, slur. You know, just have things be a little bit fuller in the slurs. This is really cool. This, you know, slurring down from this C. This is something that very rarely happened. It was just using this C as the place to go into the violas, and I think that that actually works really great with, you know, bringing in the bassoons and everything else. Once again, try to avoid this rest da 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 da. But I mean, just as long as you only do it like once or twice here or there, then it's. I mean, it's still not the strongest thing, but yeah, there's always a chance that this note, and even this note, may come in just a little ragged. You know, in rehearsal for a pro orchestra, maybe. Maybe not. Definitely for a community orchestra, there's a risk of that. Yeah, and then this is all really cool. So here you've sort of divided it, and you're very, like, I think that whatever slurring happens should match in both sets of instruments, right? So like you mostly do it, but then it's uneven in other places, and I'm not really sure what's intended. Right? This would get, you know, totally would get lots of question marks. Then if you decide, okay, well, I do want this all to be slurred, then you might get asked, well, why isn't it in the viola? Right? So just really try to have things be a little bit more uniform and a little bit, you know, like there's no need to have all of these little bits of finesse and so on, and you know, to over finesse the slurs or not, right? In Beethoven. You know, just a little bit maybe is okay, but like doing it all the time, it just gets to feel fussy, right? And then, of course, as I mentioned before, whatever slurring you do here, you should do there, right? But yeah, this leads, and the question is, does this lead back very well, right? So what was happening before? Here we've got violin 1, violin 2, bassoon, right? But what was happening before? Shouldn't this be what happens so that it can go into the repeat with more regularity? Maybe rewrite that first ending, eh? And just make it more uniform to what was going on before, okay? Because this almost feels like a completely different arrangement, right? Like maybe this was like your original conception, and then you went back to that first page and you changed your mind and you changed a bunch of things and you didn't come back here and fix it, right? That's what it feels like to me. Okay, so we have reached the point at the end of C where I like to jump ahead to E and then compare the approach of each of the recapitulation sections with the original section, right? So let's jump back. We were talking about the A section, so let's refresh our memories. You know, there were these syncopations here, and there wasn't much slurring going on in the violins, and you know, I asked you maybe you could do that, and then there were more syncopations here, and this like little diving thing happening there, and then there was the piccolo and flute in harmony, and I said, well, why can't that be for the oboes? And then you had piano, you know, contrasting with mezzo forte and so on, and then this really emphatic strings right in here, the really lovely little harmony right in here, and then ending mezzo forte diminuendo to piano, right? Then flute, winds answering strings and back and forth and so on, right? All right, so remember all that, all right, everybody? Okay, so now let's go to E and see how that was dealt with, right? All right, and then we've got some similar stuff. And look at this. Look at these slurs. Right? So, Klaus, if you're out there kicking yourself and saying, oh, no, I was supposed to put slurs in the first part and I didn't proof it, and I'm so sorry, Thomas. Don't worry about it, all right? But yeah, here I'm seeing some very, very sensible, nicely scored slurs, right? Couldn't we have this also slurred? Ta, 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 ta. Slur this, and you know, this could just be like, this could be mezzo staccato, ta 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 ta, you know, like just mezzo or portato, or just a single quarter note, right? Or you just leave it as eighth notes is fine. Yeah, and then, then instead of diving downwards, we have the staccato, right? Da 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 da, just a little touch of oboe there. Da da. Right, so here, like what is absent is like the clarinets and bassoons doing the syncopation, right? So if that element is important to you, Klaus, you might want to go back and see if maybe reintroduce some of it, compare the two sections and see. But if you feel like you want this to be much, much simpler, then that makes sense, right? It's just like almost like turning the page back. Maybe Beethoven's rethought, like how he felt about that walk. Maybe it's like, well, I had my expectations were just way too high. I'm getting a little tired now. It's time for simplicity. I think I'm going to go over to that bar there and just, crack some jokes with my favorite barkeep. We're going to, he's from Bonn, just like me, and we're going to joke about the old country, and I'm going to listen to some of those guys in the corner playing their silly instruments and playing all those great old tunes that I love, from my homeland, right? Maybe that's what's on Beethoven's mind. This is very cool here, this little pedal point. That's really lovely. Great idea. All right, and once again, you've got your little harmony in here with clarinet, right? This time, and then ta 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 ta, then answering by bassoon ta 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 ta, and we've got the first clarinet coming in here and reinforcing this and so on. That's nice. So, just question is like, do you want like here we got the D and this is carrying the C forward and you're supporting the violas and so on. So do you want that interval and then you spread out? I mean, like the way that you've got it scored, it sounds actually kind of cool to me, just so long as like it's intentional, right? And it wasn't a few mistakes in there. Right. So yeah, and just like I mentioned before, like look, this is harmonized, that is harmonized, that is octaves. Can't the oboe get a little harmony in here? This is where second oboe comes in, right? It could really be helping out. Maybe that was why it didn't get. Is that the reason why? Was that you decided to not have a second oboe? Yeah, cello coming in there. Yeah, I think cello needs to be a little like the bassoon by itself, great. Bassoon plus cello, we're starting to build a texture. Cello by itself, you're starting to lose the texture right before you're going into something intense, right? Maybe that's not the greatest strategy. Maybe you should keep bassoon around, or maybe is there somebody else who could be contributing in there, right? Maybe you could just add double basses an octave below, right? But one way or another, I don't know if I like this. First bassoon, then intensifying, and then losing the intensity of the bassoon. Especially when you're about to go da 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 da. Once again, slurring pattern. Is this supposed to be like before? But this is nicely built, by the way. Just the developing everything to push into the following da da dum. Now you had this really cool like diminuendo here. Do you really want to leave it out? Right. If you do, what do you have to mark here? Forte sempre, right? Yeah, so that the player realizes, okay, we're not going to do what we did before, right? So anytime you do some major change like that, especially where you have a recapitulation, similar to this, where just like the onset of the material really kind of is very, very similar, if not identical, transposed into another key, right? So just forte sempre, and then dun, dun. Then and then you're bringing back your little diminuendo. Da, 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 da. Yeah, and this is all very cool. Da, da, da. Pluck, pluck. Yeah, just dun, dun. Yes, I just totally approve of that, especially you being a little bit more restrained here. Okay, I feel that that's great, and I love the little the way that the harmonies all worked out here, and the contrary motion, the oboe, and everything else. Very, very cool. Yeah, less is more, right? Okay, and then we're back to this. So yeah, so all right, you're going for the mixed color here. Then suddenly you lose it, right? Are you sure you want that? Like, because like it's a sudden drop off the hill, and then you have this very light color. At least your bassoons are louder. Maybe you're thinking to yourself, "Oh, geez, Thomas, I meant that to be mezzo forte in the other part too." Right? Yeah, so that's all right. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. And then, shouldn't we go to piano here? Right? Underneath all of this. Once again, same thing that I mentioned before. I think that this is perfectly fine. Um, let's. I forgot to recap what we did at B. You guys probably remember most of it, right? But we had that, the softer bassoons, and then soft bassoons under this that should be soft, right? So pretty much the same. And then here was that really mezzo forte divisi, walking down, and then we had the da da da, which needed to be stronger, and these lovely clarinets, which I didn't mention before, da 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 bum ba dum ba bum, and these repeated notes and so on, pushing forwards, right? And then you had these gaps, right? And then I recommended strengthening this with C trumpet players, they're about to close a deal, on their smartphone, so maybe they could get back to work here or something, or somebody else. Yeah, and then this I mentioned before, this could be a little bit more expansive here. Yeah, and then leading forwards to here, maybe using the second violins to, maybe once again having your trumpet players play in a more useful register, and having your second violins help with the trill, right? So those were my comments and observations about this. We can see how this is all scored, right? So now, all right, now we're going to look at that same area. Right, so here we're just like seeing that you're really holding off on any kind of, any kind of brass or anything. And it's scored really similar, just kind of some similar transposition, and like once again we have some imbalances here, the mezzo forte pushing forwards, and then da 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 da, right? And then piano, you just suddenly drop to piano here, and with these repeated notes, and then mezzo forte suddenly pushing forwards. Once again, I just feel that this really needs to be like, whatever you're going to do to fix the other section, use it to fix this. Try to have more uniform dynamics. Try to have more, just more of an ear for balance. Like these repeated notes here in these violins are going to make almost zero difference with so much weight on top, right? And that's a shame, because you really want this behind this bum ba-dum 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 ba-dum. You know what I mean? So just, this is better, right? That's more better. That's better balanced, rather than just suddenly the mezzo forte and then also this being piano and this being mezzo forte, right? So just like think about the balance a little bit more right in here. And then, just as I mentioned before, if there's any way of, maybe bringing in brass a little earlier, maybe having them help out with this, to fill in this gap, supporting these patterns, right? All right, so just think about it. And I don't have any problem with this. It's 7 beats, right? So. One thing I would say is you have 2 identical parts, and you have the flute dropping out for half the duration of the piccolo. Just have them uniform. Like the piccolo, the way you've scored the piccolo is fine. Just have that for your flute, okay? And then once again, like you could go stopped, open, stopped, open, stopped, open, because just like before, this part is really kind of buried in the texture, right? You're doing it exactly like you did it before. Bassoon and playing that part, and then viola trading off to a cello, right? So this is if everybody was softer and you just had this, like a single horn going bam bam, that might be dramatically much more effective, right? But I'm not saying how to do it. I'm just saying, like, there are options here. Okay? All right. Right, and then, and like these yaga daga 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 daga, this stuff happening here in violins. I think here, like, these trills probably don't need as much help because of the position of them is, much more opportune. So, maybe this is going to work out the way that you have planned it. But once again, just you have like one pitch per instrument here in your horns and trumpets, and there's so many things that you could be doing here to fill out the sound picture. All right, so now let's go back and look at the C section and just remind ourselves what happened before. Oboe dovetailing into flutes, right, and supported by bassoon and then clarinet, and then these sort of inconsequential staccato strings. Remember, I had a problem with mezzo forte contrasting with piano, and then our flash of temper with the chord being very high at the beginning and then high again, right? So that there's no sense of growth. There's just a slightly fatter sound when as you change some of the voicings and add brass and so on, right? And then this kind of working the way down was kind of fun, and then we had the trading off and so on. Okay, so now this actually is taking us towards the end of the piece, right? So so we have something similar. We have we have oboe dovetailing into flute over bassoon, right? It's very similar. And then, clarinet support and so on. And then, just like before, I think you could like dovetail this time on the C, right? Rather than the kind of sort of patching together. Or shouldn't this be marked piano dolce? I think I heard in the mock-up this was suddenly screamingly loud, right? Because there it wasn't marked at a softer dynamic. The same thing here with the clarinet. Yeah, and just like this, but dynamics or not, this works so much better. Piano dolce answered by piano right in here. Sort of a sneaky staccato. And then this makes much more emotional sense. And then suddenly this flash of temper. Bum, bum, bum. And this time you did jump up an octave, right? And this is just so much more effective the way that this is scored. All right, and then you could be bringing in more pitches with these horns and trumpets, right? Okay. And then do we want slurs and there's still a question of slurs and so on. This feels a bit of a copy paste because of the same exact slurs and so on. Just the more regular and normal the slurs are, just the easier it is to play, to be perfectly honest. Or just completely no slurs at all. That's also easier to play, right? Rather than having to sort of go tie, 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 ta, 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 tie, it's just like, what am I doing here? Right? So pro players are used to reading all kinds of weird, things, right? Yeah, you got to put in the second voice rest down here, right? Like when you've got, if you've got everything scored correctly here, then you don't need to mark 1 or 2, right? If you have the second voice rest down here, then we know that this is the first part, and of course the stems will go up, and then the second voice will come in, and we know which is which, right? Just so long as we have the rest in the opposite part. Right? Now this one's saying just like the primo player, right? That's all fine. Because there isn't any secondo player to trade off with. But he really is kind of going on a long, long time to not be trading off. Right? And same thing here. I'd say just give them each a bar, right? Yeah, and then, just like I mentioned before, that's this running part is really getting lost in the texture. The texture is just getting so huge here, right? And it just isn't that much support on this. Now, a lot of people solve this problem by having the lower strings, and then maybe violas or something coming in when the part got higher. Anyway, but just having some support on these wind parts, right? from the strings, and that kind of helped things. But like, you just have to be careful. If you're going to go sforzando accents on this while this is going on, we can't really hear what's like the most important part of the music, right? And then once again, we just didn't have those big chords in the in the whole orchestra, which I felt like that's a strength of yours. You write a good tutti chord, Klaus. So I missed that. I wish that it had been in there. All right, so now let's look at section D. This is really lovely. There's a nice this all feels really natural to me, the way everything is kind of going forwards. So all right, so I feel, speaking of natural, I feel this feels a little unnatural to me. Like you're thinking about like how the music is going, tunt 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 tunt, and then this part not matching the repeat before, right? So that's one unnatural problem of the transition. Then the next one is pow. Where did this come from? Pow, da 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 da. It's just like I feel like there's no lead in. There's no like this big huge chord. Like there's nothing emotionally preparing us for it. It just is bam. You know what I mean? So. And that there isn't any accent on it or anything. It isn't just this, it isn't this mighty stroke to sort of wake the audience up or anything. Give us a little preparation for this, right? Just, maybe roll into it in your timpani, or is there some kind of thing, some way we could, have this make more sense in context, right? And then here, I would say like you've got this, you've got more slurring happening here. The slurring is it's a little irregular, right? We have an opportunity to make this big and beautiful and smooth, right? You start off with a nice slur here, and then there's no slurs. Ta 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 ta. Right? Why not ta 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 or ta ta? Yeah. So like. Yeah, and then yeah, and then this is really lovely right here, little bits and pieces in the wind section. Right. And I've already talked about this a little bit. There's some very cool stuff in here. Okay, I just want you to balance it all out, right? So don't let the dun da dun bum ba bum bum ba bum dun da dun dun da dun, or don't let that so dominate the music that we lose touch of the patterns. The patterns are incredibly important. They have to just, they have to keep rolling, and they have to be the bedrock, right? Because like all the stuff is just little commentary. It's like it's sort of like there's like, a bunch of guys hanging around on a fence, one of them says, hey, did you notice such and such? And it's like, yeah, I got that. And what did you think about that? Well, I'm not so hot on that. Well, maybe you're right. Well, maybe I'm wrong, though. You got a point there, and so on. So it's just like, that's just like the little commentary, right? But the scenery is, the nervous energy is so, so important here, right? Yeah. Anyways, and I would just say, like, minor, like, watch out about very fussy bowing and slurring and staccatos and everything else. Just like try to make it the more uniform that you can make it, the more that you can convey that energy. And then once again, just like don't push so hard right here, because then like against the mezzo forte, right? Then this just feels like completely underpowered, and like why should we keep paying attention to it? Because we made this so important, right? It should be more like this is pushing and pushing. It's pushing at this. It's pushing at the patterns. It's making them more and more intense, more and more nervous. And then finally that just lets them go and they run for it. And then they just shove the music all the way down to this mighty tutti, right? Right, so like that's what I'm sort of missing with the way that this is proportioned, right? So you got to work on the proportions. It's almost like a sculpture. Like Beethoven is very much like sculpting. Okay, so those are my thoughts on movement 1. All right, Klaus? And the fun has only begun because we have to take a look at movement 2. So, just before we do that, though, I just want to say, once again, even though I am chopping your score to bits, I hope that I hope that you never get the idea that I don't admire what you're doing, and that I'm not aware of your progress as an orchestrator, and that I'm not hugely appreciative of your support and your, and just the way that you have stuck to your progress. It's so impressive, and I think it's just really a lesson for a lot of other orchestrators, right? That just, you really are growing and getting more and more imaginative and more inventive, you know what I mean? So that means a lot to me, and meant a lot to me to have your support a couple of years ago when I was putting this together. It wouldn't have been the same without you involved. All right, so let's take a little break from Beethoven, and I sort of gave you half of a orchestration tip yesterday. Let's check out the rest of it now. Yesterday, during the intermission to Gabi Dröge's evaluation, we took a look at the first half of a preview tip from my upcoming book, 100 Last Orchestration Tips, about how Debussy scored bassoon instead of cellos in octaves with double basses, in very subtle ways. Now let's look at the second half, in which he uses a low, exposed fourth horn. The thing to remember is that bassoons and horns are generally more penetrating and rich in their sonority. In loud, edgy scoring, such combinations might easily sound top-heavy, dominated by those upper voices. But in softer, subtler passages, the rich, velvety tone of the double basses envelops, to a degree, the judicious restraint of their partner's timbre above. Resultantly, a listener focusing on the overall picture may absorb these low octaves without really noticing the slightly richer top pitch. Then again, the slightly brighter top pitch can also add a soft luminescence to the texture above. This is just what we see in La Mer, a couple of bars before Rehearsal 40 in the second movement. Debussy builds a far more complex, intricate sound picture than in the excerpt we looked at yesterday. Unison low-register flutes float up again and again from their breathy bottom Cs, in between soft divisi violas and cellos. Plinking whole-tone patterns on harp glitter under high soft chiming on glockenspiel, and over furtive little pizzicato cello plucks. A single soft but intense ray of light shines high above, like a beam of light breaking through thinning clouds. First horn glowing on a pianissimo written G-sharp. Grounding this ephemeral tapestry far below, double basses sit on a low B, accompanied this time at the octave above on fourth horn. Here's an example of something I referred to in the video tip, Exposed Low Horn Notes, how a single low horn can lock into the stabilizing overtones of an instrument an octave below it for a perfectly secure extended tone, with less worry than if it were completely alone down there. The resultant sound is dark, soft, and yet on solid ground. The most wonderful thing about it is how, after little thematic elements gradually force the misty texture toward a radiant resolution, Debussy contrasts this combination with a move back to the more indistinguishably matched cellos at the octave by Rehearsal 41. I'll be back next weekend with another tip to share during the intermissions of the next 2 dotted Longa orchestration challenge evaluations. Meanwhile, let's check out some more of Klaus's colorful, evocative scoring in the second movement of this sonata. Another wonderfully imaginative and energetic orchestration. Really great, Klaus. I mean, once again, I feel that this is really good work. Now, that doesn't mean that there is nothing to fix here. There's still a lot of little things, but I'm actually very hopeful that you will take the time to fix them if you feel that there is a chance of this getting read, performed, rehearsed, whatever. Okay? And in that, with that hope, I am going to go over this score. Before we go section by section, we will go through once again a list of notes that I made looking over your score, and then we'll, first I'll give you some general, and then bar by bar enhanced evaluation, and then after that we'll go section by section, and I'll talk about separate issues. Okay, let's start off with just a few score layout things. Now, I noticed that there is a slight bug here, and that is that the sub brackets are showing up as braces. And I don't know if that's due to incompatible versions of Sibelius trying to talk to each other, or something in the importing from one application to another, or whatever. But these should be sub brackets rather than braces. And I don't think that there's anything I don't think this is your fault at all, Klaus. I think this is just something that Sibelius is doing, because I tried just now to replace these braces with sub brackets, and then it just gave me the braces again, right? So it's very, very strange. But just try to fix that if that is an ongoing issue in your scoring. Okay, so as with the previous movement, really make sure, especially for the sake of your mock-up, right, that you make sure that, like, when you are assigning a dynamic, that the dynamic applies, like when you have split voices like this, that the dynamic applies to both voices by using, selecting the dynamic and then going Option 5 or Alt 5, right? So needs to be this blue color, right? Because otherwise, we have situations like this, like you can hear in the mock-up, that like only the like certain voices you can hear certain voices and you can't hear others, right? So really, watch out for stuff like that. I would say, go through your entire score, and wherever you are using a split voice, make sure that the dynamic has been set to all voices, right? Alt 5 or Option 5. I think there's like here's another example, right? So second voice is going to stay at forte, right? So we select this and just go Option 5, right? And then the same thing is true here. You did a copy paste, it looks like. So what that means is that the lower voice, like the voices they may not match, right? So once again, we'll change that, right? Okay. All right, so now, there was this one other one right here, the clarinets and the clarinets and horns, right? So you can see here that, like, the crescendo will be understood by the instruments. Let's go one half a beat further. So the crescendo will be understood by both voices in both of these staves, but the actual dynamics won't be, right? So I'm going to select them out. Okay, this is Shift Option D or Shift Alt D, right? And that just leaves this. And then I'm just going to go Option 5, problem solved, right? Okay, so that's just some workarounds with Sibelius. All right. So now, let's talk about an actual issue here, and that is that the tempo is really just enormously fast. It's so, and it's not so much that this is unreasonable in terms of a tempo in general, whether it's played on piano or orchestrated or whatever. It's just that the way that you have scored things, like the staccato, really fast staccato in clarinet, for instance. The clarinetists can't go tucka 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 tucka. Or clarinetists can do double tonguing, but they kind of don't like to. They'd rather do single tonguing. It's just much more precise. Reeds in general are better to do single tonguing. But flutes can do double tonguing all day long. And then some of these patterns are just, they would require a lot of practice. And you want to make sure that when you give this score to to a community orchestra or some lesser orchestra rather than world class, you want to give them options, right? So what I would say here is just do this to help them out. All right, just give them that option. All right, of playing it a little slower, down to 132, right? And I think that will that might feel slow to you, but it will feel very, very fast to the players, right? Um, so, just a couple other things left over from our previous evaluation, right? Flute and oboe, not flutes and oboes, right? Because, obviously I looked through the whole part and so on, and you just have one voice on each, and it's obviously intended. You don't mark whether it's the first or second or anything like that. So obviously you really intend this to be like one of each. And of course, the abbreviation needs to say T trombone, right? Right. So you have a um, so you have those grouped like that. Um, you have, generally speaking, you have some. You really made an effort with this movement to make sure your divisi and unison markings were valid, right? And like I'd say more than before. But then you have some situations where you just keep marking divisi over and over and over again. Like divisi lasts in the player's mind until you run into a unison, right? So like they're all divisi a due, right? There's like no need to uh, don't say divisi a due, say divisi in due, right? Don't say a due, say in due, right? Okay. Um, and then of course the proper cancellation for pizzicato is not ord, it is arco, right? Now Sibelius understands it ord to be arco, but I mean it's really strange though. Let's jump back here. Yeah, so I see. I think you need to proof. That's another thing you need to proof, right? I think you have maybe some copy paste where yeah. See, I'm not seeing anything. I'm not seeing any kind of string technique or anything like that. So it seems to me like this ord here is, I don't know. It's like maybe this was intended to be pizzicato and this was intended to be pizzicato and you forgot to mark it. So you got to go through and do a bit more proofreading. It seems to me like this movement may have been, you may have decided just to score one or something, or maybe the first one took so long that you just ripped through this second movement and there are more careless errors. I don't know. Like there are a lot of things, for instance, like you've got these slurs here, right? Are they intended to keep going, right, or not? Or yeah, like, and then when the conductor sees the slurring pattern in one set of instruments and not in the other, they might just say, okay, so this guy left out the slurs and let's put them in, right? So it's a situation where you might want to actually mark détaché, right? So like not only does the player use the middle of the bow, but obviously it's intended to be separately bowed. Just to clear some things up there. All right. Um, and then you need to proof your wind parts, like your lower winds and your brass horns and trumpets for unison, like, or not unison, a due, first or second player or whatever. Like for instance, here we don't even know who's playing trumpet, right? Is this the first player, second player, both of them? What's going on here, right? And it just goes on and on and on. Um, so yeah, so you need to fix that. Another thing too is there's very little in the way of multiple voices for your brass or your horns, right? You're just basically using single voices throughout, and in fact, I would say that like you really do a lot of single voices for a lot of things, right? There are, as I mentioned before, you could have multiple flutes and oboes, and you could be assigning more more trading off between the two parts. You could be assigning more harmonic pitches, right? You could, and especially true in the trumpet parts, right? There are a lot of opportunities where you score your trumpets very low, right? And there's a lot of bright emphasis that is lost in your scoring. Yeah, yeah. For instance, like right here, you've got your C trumpet. You've got a single pitch doubling the top horn pitch, right? So that what there could be a lot more emphasis given to this chord, especially with some other issues that I'll talk about in a minute. Okay, and then here at the end, like this is the only place where you have multiple pitches in your trumpets, and here you have multiple pitches in your alto trombone part, right? That's not a thing, right? Because like each of your trombone players is a single player, right? It's one person. Okay, and then just one other issue which I see right away here, and that is just to make sure watch out for things like this, so that you have your bar lines match your instrument groups. Right? Okay, so now let's discuss a few isolated things with your bars. Now, once again, this is not to critique you or to turn this orchestration coaching into focusing on engraving problems and so on and so forth. We'll talk about orchestration, but the thing is, how do you get this score ready for the stands, right? How do you get it ready to be performed, rehearsed, looked at by a conductor, all those other kinds of things, right? So those I think that really deserves extra attention with these longa and dotted longa entries, right? Because there's so much effort was put into it, right? That you are doing some semi-professional or professional work, right? This is the thing. So I should give you some professional coaching. Okay, so let's talk about these mordents. Okay, I think it's a really cool idea. Da, 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 da. The problem is the speed. You are going so fast here that the eloquence and elegance of da da dun is lost. So if the tempo was 132, then this mordent would work better. Da da dun as opposed to da da dun. Right? The da is so fast at this tempo that it almost sounds like a mistake. And then, of course, right in here, it's like completely lost because nobody can really hear it against all the fluttering around that you've got going on in your flute and the bouncing on your oboe and so on, right? So once again, it just sounds like it's clutter. And then the same thing is true, like when you do the recap here. Now, in the next couple of iterations of the main theme, you don't use the mordent at all, right? And that's probably just because of the placement of the different different gestures, right? It doesn't really lend themselves to mordents. So it's the kind of thing that you can just have it thrown in and then see whether or not it works, and it just might not, right? Now, there are a lot of wrong notes, and I think this maybe is another indication of it not being proofed, right? But for instance, let's look at right in here these cellos, right? Isn't that supposed to be a B natural, and these pitches as well, and oops. Darn it. For goodness sakes. Oh, I see. Because I've got the bar selected. All right. So yeah, so once again, these B should be B naturals, correct? Because of the harmony. Look at all these other B naturals. I mean, if we were just going to go from that. And then, of course, these B should also be B natural in the bassoon, correct? All right. So I've gone through this, and I've found some of the most obvious of the conflicts, and written down a few of them for you here, and some other issues too. Okay, so yeah, so I mentioned divisi, like you know. Okay, so if you've got pizzicato here, right? So yeah, and here's an example of you using ord to cancel pizzicato. All right, so don't do that. All right, so here you've got unison marked in your second violins, and then you tell us unison again. So watch out. So those are things that you want to proofread out. All right, superfluous unisons and divises. Okay, so while we're on this page, let's talk about the violas here. Okay, so they are very underpowered. You have all of this stuff happening at mezzo forte, and just and it's very, very cool, very modernistic, in fact. And yet, like I just feel like you have a lot of mixed dynamics and things. So I really want to encourage you, Klaus. With your gifts, your imagination, and everything else, I think that you can figure out a way to score everybody pretty much the same dynamic all the time, but score to the strengths of registers and to the ranges of the instruments in a way so that they can all be playing the same dynamic most of the time, right? Rather than having a lot of these things where you basically you have this idea, I'll just have I'll have my winds in front, and then you end up with an extremely important part, incredibly important part. Right? All of this stuff that the viola is doing is so important, and nobody can hear it. Right? It is really what's keeping the nervous energy going here. Right? Now we can hear it here because this is forte in the first violins, but the violas are a special case because they are the string instrument that has the weakest projection, and that's on purpose, by the way. Okay, it's not intended to be a strong instrument. It's intended to be an instrument that blends really well with the other strings, and also provides for the job that viola was created, it does it incredibly well. Right, like to make a loud viola would probably be not the greatest thing if everybody in your viola section had loud violas, unless let's say you had an underpowered section. But the general scope of viola is just perfect, I think. But you cannot score things like this and expect to maintain that same nervous energy that's so vital, right? And the same thing here. Like this is incredibly important. The busyness of this. Could you have spared somebody? Right? Could this have been doubled by an oboe player? Maybe this could have been second oboe, and then this could have been first oboe, right? Playing off of the second oboe. So you just need to like think about some kinds of doublings that you could provide for some instruments and so on, right? This right in here could have been doubled by like second clarinet, right? Maybe. And then like the same thing that I was talking about, like maybe this being first oboe and this being second oboe. If you are doubling, like it, you don't even need a first and second oboe. You could just have this be the oboe part because you're already doubling these pitches in your first clarinet, right? So like maybe you don't even need to add another oboe. But one way or another, the nervousness of this needs to come through. I would actually say, thinking about it again, maybe it's better off as a clarinet part because the clarinet will blend better with the timbre of the viola, right, and not obtrude too much into the dancing quality of the staccato here in the winds. But one way or another, this needs to strengthen. Absolutely needs to strengthen. Okay. Now at 133, let's jump ahead a little bit again. Okay, so this tutti chord has got a problem. Okay. I think, Klaus, you either intentionally or unintentionally edited out the seventh of this D flat chord. This is supposed to be a D flat seventh chord, right? Because Beethoven is building towards and towards and towards something that feels like it's going to be a resolution, and then he pulls the rug out from the listener. Right? You feel that it's going to resolve maybe to an A, to like say maybe like an A flat chord or a G flat chord or something like that. But it just stays on D flat and goes to a D flat seventh, which creates more harmonic problems for him to work out, right? But you took the seventh out of the chord, so it's like you're blunting the joke. Like there's no more joke there now, right? So be really, really careful about using the framework of Beethoven's inspiration and his phrasing and his source music and everything else and changing the context of the harmony, right? Because you can run into a brick wall, right? So like this is not going to make anybody in the audience laugh. They'll just be, whoa, you know. But it's like, I mean, if that's what you intended, then I can't say, you know, that was good or bad. But what I can say is that it doesn't convey the meaning of what Beethoven intended here. Okay. 159. There's just like a couple little piddly things. You're missing an entrance dynamic here, right? And then, yeah, unison. Right? So like this is just like all part of the process of proofreading. Just curious about something. We've got this ordinario here. All right, pizzicato. Okay. And then I just want to go up again. All right, and then yeah, and this is an ordinario, and I'm not sure if you intended this to be pizzicato as well. It's a little unclear. All right. All right, so now at the beginning of this page, all right, so there's a lot of issues with this last screen. Okay. So this is what makes me wonder whether or not you just ran out of time. And it's okay. I mean, I'm not going to get on your case about it. But yeah, like the markings are so incomplete, you stopped marking this mezzo forte halfway through, right? You know what? If you just copy paste, right, then you don't have to worry about it. Copy, select, right, is a thing that you could do. Now, I'm not really sure what your intentions are, so I'm just going to put it back in there, okay? But, yeah, so anyway, yeah, so this whole page, or this whole screen needs to be gone over for some editing. Okay, and, you know, speaking of dynamics, 173, we have some missing dynamic changes, right? Isn't everybody supposed to go dun 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 dun? Right? Maybe there should be a rallentando here. Dun 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 dun. Right? Well, you could even start the rallentando back here a little, but you know maybe here, right? Okay, and then if this gets cooled down to piano in all parts, right? Like the way that you've got it here, your lead instruments, first and second violins, get soft and nobody else does. They're all forte still, right? Everybody should be soft. And then maybe you could have an extra diminuendo here at the end, or just end with one way or another, but there's no pianissimo here. There should be a pianissimo, shouldn't there? In this final chord. All right, now you have this sort of tempo change here, marking it slower and slower and slower. Maybe just get rid of all that or hide it. You know, just kind of select it and then type Shift, Command, or Control H, right? So now I've got it hidden, right? And then you could just say, hang on, let's do it like this. right? You just mark a rallentando there, and then you've got the. I actually have my views turned off to hide. Hang on a second. To hide invisibles. That's strange. This really isn't behaving correctly. Okay. All right. So yeah, there's something up with the way that your score adapted to mine. So, but I don't. It's not even worth hassling about. Let's just focus on the evaluation of your orchestration. Watch out for where do the dynamics go under the entrances, things like that. Okay, and then do you really want the cellos and double basses to stay pianissimo throughout? Of course not, right? So, once again, we're missing some dynamic markings, probably forte here and fortissimo there, and so on. All right. I should think that if you're going to go to fortissimo here with your bassoons, probably everybody else should be, right? But maybe it's better to have like mezzo forte here, and then go to fortissimo in winds and strings, and then forte in your brass. I think you can have forte in your trumpets. I don't think that will hurt anything. Okay, and then one last little issue, and that is, are you happy with the staccato in this? I mean, just because Beethoven marked the staccato, does that mean that you feel that that's the way to end this piece? Right? I mean, does that make dramatic sense? What about you know what I mean? Like a short but emphatic note, right? So, what if this were an accent instead of a staccato, right? Or even like a marcato accent, right? So that marcato accent will get you a nice long full bow, right? Like a hammering bow from all of your string instruments, martellato, right? And then just a real, an intense accented. It'll still be staccato in a certain way. It'll be separated, but it won't be doink, right? It'll be. Do you see what I'm saying? So like that, maybe that's the right way to go with this at the end. Now, once again, I'm not going to blame you too much for this being incomplete. I feel the signs of this being rushed, right? So let's go back to the beginning now, and we'll look at it section by section. So, evaluation criteria. Do the shifts of dynamics and registers imply contrast of texture? You've taken it to be thus. And I think that it's a fairly good strategy because in the score the parts are pretty much in the same register for the first iteration, right? That's of this main theme. And while you do change the registers around a little bit, you sort of jump everything up an octave and so on, and you add some texture and so on, which I think is lovely. The main thrust of this is that we have strings versus winds and so on. Now, that you've kept Beethoven's dynamics, which I think is wonderful, right? Rather than overdoing it. Now, is it possible to stay pianissimo here? Right. Dun 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 dun. Now, at the tempo that you're going, like if you're going 144, I don't think that a meno is appropriate here, right? Like, because you just got this ba ba bum dun 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 da 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 ba bum ba dum bum 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 ba dum bum ba. I don't think that like the slight pause here that I've suggested in other, like for my own orchestration and in other people's efforts from time to time, I don't think that quite works here. But maybe it would be good to just drop down a little bit to just get a little bit more dynamic variety, right? Da, da, da. And then you can go back to piano here. Dun, da, da, dun, dun, da, la, 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 you know, but maybe crescendo. Right. Da, da, da. Because I think dun, da, da, dun, dun, da, la, 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 you know, just like the sudden burst of energy here just really feels a bit unnatural. Okay, so, you know, as far as the orchestration is concerned, I think it's lovely. It's nice. Um, yeah, so this is going to be like for the flute, it's going to be, you know, just pretty easy. For the clarinet, it's going to be a bit tougher, but it's doable, right? But I wouldn't give this to anything less than a first class clarinetist at 144. I would really want somebody with some chops, right? And you might be thinking, well, of course, Thomas, I'm scoring for a professional orchestra here. That's great, but how are you going to get it performed? By what orchestra is available to you, right? You might not have any orchestra available to you, right? And especially if you insist on having this be virtuosic, you know, in every bar. Okay, so if these winds are pushing towards a forte, shouldn't the mezzo forte here start at the pickup, right? Because right here you got this da da bum, right? And this is also mezzo forte, boom boom. So shouldn't the mezzo forte be back here? I'll show you a really fast way of fixing this, right? Just Shift Option or Shift Alt D, and you can, you know, you could just kind of arrow them back if you wanted to, or you could just, you know, delete them and then select the top note and copy, right? All right. Yeah, and it's just very, very cool. It's like I just love the kind of scrambling sound that you have here, and then answering it with these strings. Um, I have a like a comment in my evaluation criteria: smooth, not awkward, and I think it's like at this tempo, it's not really a question of either smooth or awkward. It's a question of whether the flow is organic, right? And especially with the way that you scored this all in staccato and so on. It's maybe the flow would be better for the clarinets if it were slurred. I don't know. It's very, very fast. Is there textural and dynamic expansion? There is. Okay. Do you maintain the nervous energy? In this case, you do. Right. Do you end the phrase with finality? Finality, framing the next part. Is the repeated material inevitable, not just replayed? I like the idea of dropping back down to mezzo forte and then pushing again. Right? Shouldn't this be mezzo forte back here? I don't think you need to keep the basses loud here. There's no need for it. Right? Shouldn't this be here? Right? And then that just feels a lot more even. And then I really love this push from behind forwards to a mezzo forte. So this is really nicely scored. This has got great balance. Right? You could probably, you could probably have a bigger role here. Like you have a voice crossing in your trumpets, right? Shouldn't your trumpets be the higher part here? Oh, darn it. Okay. All right, and then the BB section follows. So all right. Okay, so look. Some of this is very cool. All of the little trills on the beat are great. However, the trills on the offbeat, not so great for the kind of precision that you need at Allegro vivace. I mean, even at 132, it's not ideal. What if you had the oboe go staccato on a 16th note, the same pitch that the clarinet was playing, right? So it's dun 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 dun. So that gives them the pacing that they need to stay right in the middle of the beat, right? So if they have that little, if they are just tonguing the on beat, then they're basically going ta 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 ta, right? So it's just, that's way easier than them going ta 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 ta. Right? I've mentioned this before, and that is if the conductor, especially in a fast piece like this, is conducting ahead of the beat, and there are a lot of situations where the players come in on the half beat and they have to be incredibly precise at a really fast tempo, then there's a chance that they might start skipping. Da 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 da. You see what I'm saying? So this might come in almost as if it were swung, or it might come in slightly too early and start throwing off the other players. So you avoid that by giving them the on beat, and then so like it doesn't really matter if they're just hitting like a 16th of the same 16th note value of the same beginning of the trill for the clarinet, then that allows them to stay absolutely precisely on the money. You know what I'm saying? And then this is all fine. It's all great, But I've got to say that this is the kind of stuff for which trading off is made. And fortunately, you don't keep it going for more than about 3 bars, so it's totally fine. But like where you have longer and longer passages, the need for a second player is greater and greater. My fingertips are feeling very very clumsy this morning. Yeah, no, it's not. And this is like, once again, this is like on the offbeat. It's not hugely critical, but I mean, it's still, it's still going to be, you're still relying on the player, right? On the player more than the conductor to make sure that it's really, really coordinated. This I'm not so worried about. I'm much more worried about the oboist playing those trills in the middle of the beat. Yeah, and by the time you get to here and throwing in the second violin, first violins the first flute, or the flute is going to be almost completely, almost completely useless, right? But leave it in just so that you get to this trill. This is where I would give the stamp here. You're scoring your flute too low to really be useful, but score it anyway, and then just so you get to this trill meaningfully. All right, so if this is going mezzo forte diminuendo, shouldn't this be diminuendo as well in second violin? This is kind of neat. This so it's sort of like a hive of bees. Okay, so now let us jump back, and we're going to start comparing all of the first halves of the main theme, okay? And how you scored them. So let's start with, just looking at how you did this. Strings versus winds, and then right here I recommended you go to pianissimo, then piano crescendo to forte if you're going to go to forte. All right, so lower winds and middle strings and so on, and then adding the rest of the strings. Okay, so now let's see how you did it the second time. So it's very, very similar, except you're just stacking some winds on top of it the first time, right? Da da dun. This is really similar, right? Then da 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 and it's pretty much identical. And then I would say the same thing: pianissimo, piano, crescendo to forte, right? Okay, so that's kind of pretty much the same thing, except for just this added part here. All right, so now at double E, all right, here we've got very, very big scoring. I feel that this is, like, with the way that you've got your strings here, you've got a lot of weight in your brass in the middle, and you have got a lot of weight in your winds in the sort of middle and lower register. And I don't think the second violin or the viola is going to make much of a difference at all here. Okay. I think you might be better off expanding upwards with violas and second violins and violins, both first and second violins. And then adding a bit of bass function here, even if it's pizzicato, if like you're leaving your double basses pizzicato and your cellos arco, kind of, adding a little bit more bottom end here. So like maybe this could be arco and that could be pizzicato, and then that frees up your violas. They don't have to play this anymore, and they could be playing, they could be adding some more emphasis, or maybe playing a full triple octave with your upper strings, right? Just because the way that this is scored, the strings were adding very, very little to the sound picture here. And then answering it with with clarinets and bassoons, beautiful Brahmsian touch here. And then here you got brass and violas, right? So it's like a wrestling match. It's kind of like bringing out the biggest, meatiest guy on the wrestling team, and then you get, you throw in some guy who's never wrestled before, and like weighs about like 1/4 as much, right? So the big wrestler's just going to smear the little wrestler, right? So I would suggest, if you want a nice, richly richly mixed sound here of brass and strings, just do some reorganization here, where add more trumpet, add maybe bass trombone or something, or maybe you don't need your bass trombone, but I would just say have all of your strings playing along with all of your brass, and then you'll get a nice mixed sound. Okay. I would, I think like putting violas over trumpets, right? It would be better to have trumpets over horns, and then having the violins double the trumpet, right? And then you get a more balanced sound. I mean, it sounds good with the mock-up, but it's not realistic. And then now here you're stacking oboe on top, right, and adding an octave. Very, very cool. Right, and then this lovely, these strings are just really lovely in here. Da, da, da. And I think this should be pianissimo. And then back to piano. Dun, 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 dun. This is one part where I think, like, at a slower tempo, like if you're 132, I think a meno would work really beautifully here. But you don't really need to do it in the rest of your piece. But just here, meno a tempo. Dun, 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 dun. All right, and if you are going to stay at piano here, then you don't need to do a crescendo, right? Okay, so now let's look at the last of these at 150. Now here, it's very, very similar to the beginning, in the strings, dun, dun, dun. But then you answer with low clarinets and bassoons, which I think is just really lovely. Boom, 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 and then stacking winds on top of the strings. Boom, 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 boom. Very nice. And then pianissimo here, pianissimo there. Dun, dun, dun. And then back to piano. Dun, 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 dun. Well, we'll check out the coda when we get there. So this is also quite lovely. All right, now let's jump back and look at the second half of the main theme. All right. And we already sort of analyzed this before, talking about the how the clarinets are going to have some difficulty just getting this pinpoint staccato at the 144. Better at 132, I would say, or even 138. And this is pretty easy for the flute, and this is just very, very intense for the strings. Right, and then this push here, the brass at the end, I thought that was really lovely. Moving the mezzo forte over here. Yeah. A little touch of horn. That's kind of nice. You don't really need to be a duet there. Okay, so then the first recapitulation of that, it's very, very similar, right? Clarinet again, and bassoons doing the little thingy and so on, and here you're just adding piccolo, like to double with the flute. It's a pretty weak area for the piccolo. Maybe it doesn't need to do all of these pitches, Yeah. Maybe you could go bum ba da dun da 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 bum bum. Right. Yeah, and this is cool. The oboe in there and so on. It's very similar to what happened before. Right. Maybe just a little bit more support here from from clarinets and so on. Now, we've got two clarinets here. There could be some more support right in these parts and so on. Okay, and then also, like, why no? Just it seems very, very barren here. We have a very emphatic ending. No big accent or big forte or anything here at the. There's no emphasis. Where are the horns? Where's the trombones and the timpani here? Right. I think that you could make more of a dramatic gesture here. Like look at how you ended it before, right? Couldn't there be something similar, bringing things to a close again? Yeah, maybe that's just rushing. All right, now let's jump forward to bar 100. Very conveniently here at this. Yeah, so I feel that this is very fussy, very fussy slurring, and I feel it's also this is something where I would split up the clarinets. I would have like this start with second clarinet and going da dum da dun, da dun da dun, right, and then have the first clarinetist go ta 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 ta, right? I think that would be a lot more successful. And don't go die 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 die. Go tie I tie I tie I. I think that just like it's just much easier on the player. This is what I would call awkward. This tie 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 tie. I just it's just kind of weird. Okay. Then we've got our, this comes back, which is very similar as before. This is kind of nice little horn in there. Yeah, single horn is better, right? And then just, oboe and flute doubling. The flute is, it's not quite completely inconsequential. Doesn't this also need to be slurred? Yeah, you use modern slurring practice. Right? Okay. Yeah, and this is kind of fun right in here. Okay, and we will talk about the way that these end. So, mezzo forte, and are we not leading forwards to something big? Couldn't this have been a little bit more? It ends with a big C octave in the piano part, right? Shouldn't there be a double bass down here? Couldn't we have hit that hard and heavy with the timpani, and maybe some bassoons in here, right? Shouldn't that go there? Yeah, I just feel like there's some wasted opportunities in terms of building this forward to a big bang. All right, it's just Beethoven he's leg pulling, right? He's playing pranks on his listeners and being silly and fun and serious and intense at the same time. It's like he's pulling this big joke on his listeners, and even on the pianists who are playing it, right? Like challenging them to be incredibly funny and inventive and at the same time virtuosic, right? Okay. So now let's jump back to BB. We talked about, the like how effective this was, and that this might be more successful and so on, and then this stuff right in here. That was all kind of cool. The way you're pushing forward like a swarm of bees and so on. All right, so now let's talk about where you reverse things and you go downhill. Like these are all what they call connecting passages, and which is why I've got them all on their own separate screen to compare. And some of the, just to remind everybody, some of the evaluation criteria include direct transcriptions might prove extremely impractical, especially without transposing to a more negotiable key signature. I was sort of really trying to get people to transpose. Choice of instruments depending on where a passage is positioned between other passages, or dependent on dynamics or direction of line up and down. Those things sort of answer themselves as we look at the orchestration. How do these sections lead back to the other sections dramatically? Right? Does interlocking/interdependent scoring between orchestral sections support headlong momentum but with precision and clarity? That's really our biggest concern. All right. And then another question: should momentary pauses from piano interpretations play a role in helping to define the dramatic shape of the phrasing? In other words, like what I put into mine is to put a little pause at the beginning and the end of some of these. And I think that at the tempo that you're going at 144, you really don't need those. All right. So here we're going. So I think that these are pretty successful the way that they're scored, because like they give, they've got an on beat. They all start with an on beat before they go on. Now say like here you've got this and an off beat, but it's preceded with an on beat, right? So they're going ta 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 ta, like they can get into that rhythm. Right? Pum ta ta ta. So this is less successful. It would be better to have like a little boink on an A to double this. So boink, boink on a G, right? Ta 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 ta. Right? That's just so much better for keeping the first violinists absolutely on the beat. Right? It's just like you want to build things into this that just incredibly assure that it's going to be all about precision. Especially at 144. Like, you've imposed that rule on this. So we have to find the way to make it work. Yeah, and then it's ta 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 ta. Yeah, and then here I would go dun ta 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 ta, right? So just like add add the transposed pitch that will sound B flat, right? Or we'll just C, right? So, then A, same note as B, and so on. Yeah, so just add this pitch in a 16th note as a very, very quick note, just to keep the clarinetist right on the money, right? And I would say even here, right? So they'll be going ta 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 boom, and that's not going to interfere in any way with the bassoonist going ta 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 boom, right? Yeah. Shouldn't this be piano? Right, why is this mezzo forte? Everything else is going diminuendo, right? So yeah, so mezzo piano, I would say. Okay, and then shouldn't this be forte in your second violin? So we will get to this. This is what I would call the episode, right? There were 2 episodes in this. Let's jump ahead to bar 74. Actually, it's on the same screen. So we had this boom, die. All right, and look, the same exact comment. Just go toot, die, boom, da, right? So just give your clarinet player just a teeny bit of this note, right? So like a 16th note's worth of that sounding A. right? And a 16th note's worth of this sounding C. Right? And once again, it will not interfere with the timbre of the other instrument. It'll still sound like trading off between the two. It's just that you get you keep the clarinetist absolutely on track with their timing. Yeah, and then same thing here, you know, as it doubles with the oboe. And then from this point on, everything's just trading off between beats, and that's totally fine. It doesn't need any further kind of massaging to make it all work. And may I say that this is really ingenious right in here, you know, except for I think there might be a wrong note or two, but but this just is really, really lovely. It's just, and as things collapse downwards, it's all very modernistic. Yeah. And yeah, here, da 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 da. Here I would say, I will give you, like right in here, don't worry about adding little notes to keep the players on track. Right? I think that you can give them a couple of bars at the end. By the time everybody is just really locked into it and is absolutely on track. Right? And then here, I think you can fudge this too. Just like, don't worry about giving your oboist a little tiny helper note right there. Just every once in a while, you can cheat, but otherwise, yeah. But this is just so wonderfully. This is like movie music. Do you know what I mean? It's like, chase scene music or some other kind of thing. I think you did a fantastic job here, Klaus. This is one of the strongest parts of your entire score. Okay, so now 110. Let's jump forward a bit. All right, and here's the descending connecting passage. Da 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 da, and just like really same comments. I would add a little B flat 16th note here. Boom, boom, da da tun, and then here same thing. Like with your clarinet, give it the tun ta da 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 whatever. Just getting a little bit of the other instrument in it. Right. This is pretty high for your bassoon. It's going to be a little weaker than you think. It doesn't mean that it's going to be bad, though. It's just, working with, say, maybe like a semi-pro player, you might get it a little squawky. It might even crack a little, right? If their reed is not the best way up high like that. Especially playing incredibly fast, right? And then, once again, like, mezzo forte. Why are your strings so weak? Why not rethink the dynamics here, at the very, very least? How about mezzo forte in your strings? Okay, how would that hurt? How would it hurt for this to be mezzo forte along with everybody else? And then everybody diminuendo at the same time, or I guess this is coming in piano, right? Right, but here you're keeping it mezzo forte, and then like some things are continue mezzo forte, or it's a bit of a jumble. How about if you do this? Okay, everybody's mezzo forte, diminuendo here to piano, right, and then go subito pianissimo, right, rather than putting in a diminuendo. That might be the best way to do it. Yeah, don't confuse your folks as any more than they need to be confused, right? Make these quarter notes, right? Same thing here, right? Don't make things too hard on your players. All right. Yeah, fix your quarter notes right in here. And there's no need for this pitch to be an eighth note. Like if everybody is playing quarter notes here in the bass register, then just let this be a quarter note, right? And then you can just hide that. Okay. And then here we get the next episode. All right, so now the very, very last connecting passage. All right, this and look, I just think you should go through this and just, you know what to do, right? Give your clarinetist a little bit of what the bassoon is doing here. Right. So tan ta ta tan ta ta ta, and then this trading off, that's fine. But then I would just like give them. Here you can cheat. I would say that's fine. M, what's M mean? Is this mezzo forte? Yeah, and this should be mezzo forte too, right? Maybe this was intended for this. Okay. Yeah, so anybody's getting here you can cheat a little. But maybe it's weird you have this kind of going back and forth between them. Yeah, just with the way that you've set it up, it's hard for these players to like trade between. So just the way you've got it scored, these people will just have to lump it and try to really try to play in between the beats, right? So this is your area of the most danger, most peril, I would say. But like that, I mean, that's the way he scored it. So I would just say leave it alone because of the relationship between the registers jumping up and down. Right? There's nothing you can do with the way you've scored it. So you have to leave it the way it is. Maybe don't do this tie 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 tie. Maybe go tie tie. I just make these full slurs over beam groups. Yeah, and then the same thing here. There's like nothing you can do with the way that you've separated the registers from each other. So you just that's maximum peril with the way you've scored it. But like just assuming that and it's the same thing is going on here, right? Because of the distance between these notes, there just really is kind of nothing else you can do. Now, you might be able to pick off this G here because it's an open G for the violist, but I mean there's just kind of no point after that. So yeah, so there's no there with the way that you have your registers separated on these different pitches, you're just going to have to deal with it. Your players are just going to have to deal with it. And this is the strongest argument of all for you to slow it down to 32. All right, so that leaves the episodes in the coda. So let's jump back to, before I have an episode, let's jump back to 57. Boom. No timpani. Like you got one here. Why not there? And here I would say, go ahead, mark it forte, give it an accent. And same thing with your double basses. Give them an accent on a forte. Oomph. This is so separating out this slurring like this. There's once again there's kind of nothing you could do about it. So that just leave it the way that it is. But you should be distributing it to the other players, right? Shouldn't these people get the same slurring as the strings? I like the consistency of strength rising through instrumental registers. That really is our big concern here, right? So you supply that. This forte belongs here, doesn't it? You supply that with the these rising strings, but you might need a little bit more help. Do you know what I mean? Like there's see, like here you go to like doink 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 doink. Right? Maybe the role of the lower winds right here and right here needs to be more in line with what's going on in the strings and kind of guiding them forward rather than just having this kind of static roll. This is really nice though. Yeah, that's really, really nice. Maintaining the nervous energy, the worrying doubts, right? As I score here. And then boom. Yeah. Yeah, and then dropping back down to piano and building upwards again. Yeah, and I like the dialogue between the first and the seconds. That's really really nicely done. Whatever slurring happens in the first should be happening in the second, and should be happening in the winds. All right, that all needs to be fixed. Yeah, and this is very very cool. That just using the oboe in this way, just those little bursts, okay, and the little trills above, you know, piccolo and flute. Yeah, little bum. Right, and then here Beethoven builds the pausa right into the following pitch. So look, you know, you are scoring in a modernist way. You have, you know, especially that one, that that very last connecting passage, right? You know, it's just getting, like I said, it's getting cinematic. So there's nothing wrong with you throwing in a G flat here in your timpani. No, nobody minds. The timpanist doesn't mind. They'll set it back here, right? For one of their low kettles to go to a G flat, or they'll just take this A and they'll just scooch it down and go boom, right? You don't have to assign. You don't have to say change this kettle to that kettle, right? That's for students. But anyways, but just I would say throw in a nice grounding G flat here, and I think that you could easily put accents here too. Right? All right, so that's our first episode. Okay, and let's go to the recap on bar 116. And then, you know, here, like, this is much more sparsely scored than before. So I think, you know, without me going through this all and saying, do this, do that, don't do that, I think you should go back and learn lessons from the previous Klaus who scored this. And I'm just wondering whether or not this was just running out of time. You know, you didn't really have time to fix this up. So go back to what you did before and borrow some of those elements. And as I said before, just use your lower winds to support some of what's going on here in your strings. And there needs to be more of a role here for viola, doesn't there? Right? At pushing things upwards. So yeah. Even cellos could be helping out a little bit with that. Now, I really like this right in here. You know, that. So this is very, very cool. Okay, so what does Beethoven do? Bam! Right, we already talked about this chord needing to be a little bit more, a little bit more in the correct vein, you know, of being a seventh chord. But you know, fortissimo in the winds, please, and more matching up with the pitches that are happening in the, you know, this A flat could be played by the piccolo, right? It's a little low, but yeah, just, you know, this is one place where I just really, I wish that you know, were making better use of more pitches and so on. Like you just get a much fuller sound, right? F octaves in your C trumpets, right? You have two of them, and so on, right? So there's just a lot more you could be doing with the pitches. And this is very cool. Bum ba bum 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 bum. Yeah, it's really nice, and the stuff that's going on. No big problems right in here. Yeah. I almost feel though right in here, you could bring in your upper winds and just really start to push forwards to this, so that everybody ends up with fortissimo when we get here, and there's a lot of support from, you know, like you could start off with oboe helping out here, and then flutes coming in, and then just really, really driving towards this, and just ending on a big fortissimo in the winds, right? With a lot of support in these parts. All right, so consider that, please. And you could even bring in the brass a little bit, pushing a pad behind, you know, or even just go bum 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 bum. Okay. So now let's look at the coda. Yeah, and this is lovely. You keep it very, very simple strings. Bassoon helping out with the cellos once again. Who's playing here? Is this both one, two? Same thing here. Is this a duet? And of course, like it's probably just a sign of you running out of time there. Yeah, yeah. Back to unison here. Yeah, and arco, not ord. Right, and just touch of horn and upper winds. I just think that's really lovely. I felt this was very strong scoring. Bum 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 bum. Could you have kept the brass going here softer? Right, just like going diminuendo, so just you keep the consistency of this. But then again, you lose the ability to just really pull back. But if that's so, then you really should mark in that you're pulling back with your dynamics, right? Yeah, no huge notes about this, just like that, other than what I mentioned before, right? This, I mean, you might as well just divide this up into, well, I don't know. I mean, it's like, to an extent, it's like a written out bar, putting in putting in the dashed bars and so on. It lets people know this was originally a single bar in the source manuscript, so just leave it alone. But maybe these should be slurred rather than just maybe it would be better, stronger as slurs. I think just like just and also especially for like this part right here in the bassoons and right here in the flute. I think that would just be much clearer. Maybe there's a big hole right in here that the oboes could fill, and then end up on this A flat or C flat. Excuse me, I meant to say. Yeah, yeah. So there's a little patching up that you could do right in here. Yeah, and then just coming in, and then brass. All right, yeah. So no big comments on this. I think that all works pretty well. There's some places in here that I just really almost feel like your piccolo could be second flute, and then you get more out of it in tone weight in a lot of places. Like for instance, right in here, like this would sound way better and much stronger on flute two, and all of this could be played on flute two, really. Right, unless you really are trying to control this diminuendo. But I mean, you're starting off strong, so this forte on a high B flat, and then going down to, you could certainly get to piano by this C and this E, right? So that could be second flute as well. This could be second flute, and it's just doubling what's going on here. And this would be much stronger as first flute an octave higher, doubling with second flute, or this as, sorry, I said that backwards. This as second flute, this an octave higher on first flute, right? I meant to say. Apologies. Then same thing here. This could all be second flute. Same thing here, second flute. And in fact, like this would be second flute. This would be an octave higher on first flute, right? You just would reorganize the parts. Yeah, and same thing. This could all be these could all be redistributed into second flute parts and so on. Yeah, and this is fine as like all this would be totally fine, just as two flutes rather than flute and piccolo. Now here I would say this is better off as piccolo. So maybe this could be piccolo, but then the player could just jump back to second flute, this is like all these pitches right in here are very weak on piccolo. And yeah, and this is so much better as just a flute. Yeah, so I mean, there really is like the only part that I see that really absolutely needs to be on. I mean, and but even just to be completely honest with you, like a good flute player should be able to hit high D here on a standard flute. It's a bit of a squeaky note, but it's still, it's possible. Maybe you don't need piccolo at all. Maybe you just need to reorganize this into, maybe what you could do is you could have a flute one and a flute two part, and then just trade things around. Just put all the high parts in for flute one, and just mix things around. I just think you just get a much better result with two flutes rather than piccolo. Even right in here, even though that's a pretty high D, it's still, I think it's better off. Just considering the holistically around of the movement, you might be better off with just a flute. Okay, well, those are my comments on the second movement here, Klaus. So, just a few last things to comment, and that is, I've been saying, oh, I hope you get this played, and yeah, I want you to know that I'm not sitting here expecting you to do that, right? I'm not going to be disappointed in you, or I'm not going to feel that you missed this huge opportunity, and what are you doing with your life? And I'm not going to be getting on your case or anything. I just think that it deserves it, right? If there are any opportunities for a piece like this to get read or rehearsed or performed or whatever, you should try to take it. And you should maybe make some of those changes with an eye towards making it a little easier on players of a more kind of average skill level, right? Rather than the top of the top orchestra. Or maybe it's just too much work for you, and you've got other things going on that have a much better possibility of being performed, and in which case you should just pursue that. Don't worry about this piece anymore. You've learned everything you need from it, right? So, so I hope that my comments were helpful. And once again, I'm just so sorry that I was not able to evaluate this and release that as a video 2 years ago. I was just, there were times when I was so sick I did not think I was going to get better over the past 2 years. So me coming back to this and being able to finish all of these wonderful scores, especially the full sonata ones, is a revelation to me. So I'm so grateful for that, and I am appreciative that you didn't get mad at me or get on my case or anything like that. I one of the things that's really lovely, as I sort of kind of mentioned at the beginning, it's always great to get a score from you, and I've seen you grow as an orchestrator and just get better and better and craftier and so on. And you may be miles ahead of where you were when you scored this, and you might have done several significant things, and you might be looking back at this and just wincing and saying, oh no, Thomas is going to mention that, and then I do, in which case I apologize, because I think you did some really fine work with this. You have a wonderful imagination, and a lot of the way that you structured some of these passages is just really great. It's just there are a lot of little things to kind of to look after, but for the most part, the scoring is really solid and entertaining, colorful, passionate. It's just really what you would want in an arrangement like this. So you did a great job, and I hope all of this is helpful. So anybody who is still with me at this point, huge thumbs up from me. And you know what to do. Give Klaus your best comments below. And Klaus, please watch everybody else's videos as I release them in this category, if you can set aside the time. And and please also give them your best suggestions, comments, feedback, even if it's just to say, hey, I like what you did. I think that would be incredibly helpful, important, special, and so on. And it would be a great way of bringing this to a close. because at this point I'm not really sure if I can continue to do orchestration challenges. Just have to see. There was a new discovery. A paper was released last month that is starting to make the rounds about the causes of long COVID and its effects on the brain. And I'm so hopeful that it will lead to some kind of serious treatment, and that the medical institutions run by public health boards in countries that have public health boards will start taking this condition seriously and providing care as part of their hospital care and their national coverage. Because, wow, I have been self-funding my recovery, and it's very expensive. So, anyways, but not to get into that too much. Just to let you know that I've heard some good news about it, and I'm very hopeful. So, maybe that will result in a challenge next year or the year after. I'm playing with the idea of a limited challenge, maybe just for just before I'm able to have a more general one. Maybe have a kind of a limited challenge at the end of next year. But I just once again I don't know what the future holds. So think about that. Thank you, Klaus. Thanks everybody out there. And I hope you enjoyed the orchestration tip. I plan to keep doing that in the intermissions for the next 7 of these final dotted longa evaluations. I've got some really fun ones planned coming up. So stay tuned for that, and I will see you next weekend.